And continuing our list from last video, at number 5 we have Predaplant Verte Anaconda, an even more generic Link 2 monster than Halki Fibrax. Verte could be made with any 2 effect monsters and had 2 effects that you could take advantage of. The first effect lets you target any monster in the field to change its attribute to dark until the end of the turn. But it's the second effect of Verte which made it see widespread use, as by sending a normal or quick play spell card with fusion in its name from your deck to the graveyard, and by paying 2,000 life points, you could have Verte copy the effect of that fusion spell card, but you couldn't summon any of the monsters for the rest of the turn. While Verte's second effect is incredibly strong, it's only as strong as the fusion spells it can copy. If it could only send Polymerization or Super Poly, this effect would actually be quite bad and fairly situational. Fortunately for Verte, however, there have been 3 fusion spells that saw common use this year that were so busted that a ton of different strategies were willing to change the way they built their decks, just so they could accommodate using them with Verte Anaconda. These 3 fusion spells were Red Eyes Fusion, Fusion Destiny, and Branded Fusion. These fusion spells all require different materials, all summon different boss monsters, and all saw play in different kinds of decks, but the one thing each of these cards had in common is that they summoned a powerful fusion boss monster by sending materials from the deck to the graveyard. This gave any strategy that could put 2 effect monsters on the field a free end board piece that could be used as a plan B option in case their main engine was interrupted, provided they were willing to play the fusion spell's respective bricks. Red Eyes Fusion was the worst fusion spell of the 3, as it required you to play 2 normal monsters that you couldn't use for anything, and Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, for as strong as it is, was by far the worst payoff between the 3 fusion spells. Branded Fusion was slightly better, as it only required you to play a single copy of Fallen of Albaz that you could fuse away into Mirror Jade alongside Verte, and was particularly synergistic with a few Albaz lore strategies. But Fusion Destiny was by far the strongest fusion spell that you could use with Verte Anaconda. Fusion Destiny did require 2 monsters in your deck to actually use. Usually decks would play Destiny Hero Celestia and Destiny Hero Dasher, but these 2 bricks had such good graveyard effects that they would make up for any advantage you lost by drawing them, since Celestia was a free draw 2 if you had no cards in hand, and Dasher could let you summon out a monster from your hand for free during your draw phase, meaning these 2 bricks actually represented a ton of follow-up. And that's all without even mentioning the boss monster that Verte and Fusion Destiny facilitated, Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. A Destiny Hero boss monster that allows you to pop a card you controlled and a card your opponent controlled at quick effect speed, and whenever DP was destroyed, you could trigger its effect to special summon out a Destiny Hero monster from your graveyard during your next standby phase. DPE was an astonishingly good card. Its interruption had so much potential for what it could be used for. It could be removal from one of your opponent's key combo pieces or boss monsters. It was a way to deal with your opponent's floodgates. It was a way to pop your own artifact scythe to lock your opponent out of their extra deck. There was just so much that so many different decks could do with DPE. From being one of Phantom Knight's main boss monsters, to seeing play in Sword Soul, Sky Striker, Prank Kids, Branded, and so many more strategies, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer and its associated garnets were more than worth it to play for the amount of free advantage it represented. And a huge part of why so many strategies, rogue and meta alike, were able to use DPE is because of Predaplant Verte Anaconda being so easily accessible, as it made the potentially difficult draws of DPE well worth it. And in the first 5 months of 2022, if you're facing a deck, it was extremely likely to have featured both Verte and DPE. Currently, however, just like Hulk, Verte is banned in the TCG. Fusion Destiny is at 3 copies, so decks can still play the DP engine if they want, but it's no longer worth it when you don't have the same guarantee that you were getting with the engine without Verte. But while it was around, Verte changed how most pilots built their deck, and was an integral part to the success of so many different strategies throughout the year. And flipping into our number 4 spot is Dimensional Barrier, a normal trap card that saw a lot of play in people's side decks this year for being a card that would guarantee that you were winning either game 2 or 3. When you activate Dimension Barrier, you have to declare 1 monster type from among Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Pendulum monsters, and for the rest of the turn, the effects of monsters declared type are negated, and neither player can special summon monsters of that declared type. Basically, with Dimensional Barrier, you could just lock your opponent out of summoning from the extra deck. Against Sword Soul, you could call Synchro, against Branded, you can call Fusion, and against Phantom Knights, you can call Xyz. And this basically acted as a turn skip and auto win against a lot of this year's best strategies. But despite being so strong, Dimensional Barrier and cards like it couldn't be played in the main deck because it relied too much on going first, and as a result mainly saw competitive play in people's side decks. Because while Dimensional Barrier could be relied on to win a game 1, it was virtually guaranteed to win game 2 or 3 when you have opportunities to choose to go first, especially with specific knowledge of what deck your opponent is playing. This meant that with a single card, you could lock almost any non-link strategy that uses the extra deck out of play in the game at all, especially when backed up by a strong board of monsters that could just OTK your opponent as soon as you reached your second turn. Dimensional Barrier is a trap card that makes it on this list because of how effective it's been this year against a lot of the top decks. But there have been a number of amazing trap cards in people's side decks this year which have been incredibly important in winning games too. Anti-Spell Fragrance is another great example, and while less effective than Dimensional Barrier against something like Sword Soul, Anti-Spell Fragrance was even better at countering other common staples, like Dark Ruler No More or Rite of Aremesir. Likewise, A Point of the Red Lotus is also another incredibly strong card. A pointer is basically a power crept mind crush and can be used to look at your opponent's hand and banish a card from it until the end phase, and would use this to snipe your opponent's board breakers like Evenly or Forbidden Droplet. Or if they didn't have any board breakers, you could just steal their combo or starters instead. A pointer specifically was so strong that it even found its way onto the limited list this year. Side decking winning trap cards is by no means a novel strategy, but it's one that performed excellently in 2022. Guaranteeing a free win off of a single card is amazing. It meant that you were likely to win the actual match. But as it stands right now, these staples are currently seeing a lot less play because of the rise of tier limits, which are capable of playing on your turn before you even have the ability to make your game-winning trap card live. Rolling into number 3 is Rite of Aremesir, a normal spell card which allowed for the adventure engine to become an integral part of so many different decks this year. Rite has one effect, but the effect guarantees a ton of advantage off of a single card. You can only activate Rite when you don't control an adventure token, and it allows you to special summon an adventure token to your side of the field for free. Then you can place a Fateful Adventure card directly from your deck into your spell and trap card zone. But Rite also comes with a restriction that prevents players from using on-field effects of any normal summon monsters during the turn it's activated. Rite's restriction is actually really interesting, because it made the card, and by extension the adventure engine, generic enough to be played in a ton of different strategies, but gave deck builders a hard choice between using either the adventure engine to cover for some of the deck's weaknesses, or having access to effects of their powerful normal summons. And in a lot of cases, the adventure engine won out because of how incredibly strong it is. A single Rite of Aremesir gives you heaps of usable card advantage. It generated a free token body and allowed you to grab your Fateful Adventure from your deck, and that Fateful Adventure could be used to search out Dracoback whenever any monster is summoned to the field. Then you could use the other effect of Fateful to search for your Wandering Griffin Rider, as long as you discard a card. And if you just so happen to discard the Dracoback that you searched, you can trigger Dracoback's Graveyard effect to equip itself back onto your field to the Adventure token, and then special summon out your Griffin Rider from your hand for free. So, the one copy of Rite gives you 2 bodies on field, with one of them being a negate, and gives follow-up for Fateful Adventure, which you could use on your next turn to search for either Enchantress or Griffin Rider again, and a way to out an opponent's monster or Floodgate with Dracoback. And as a result of its general strength, when the Adventure Engine released this year, it saw a ton of playing rogue decks like Phantom Knives and Branded that had adapted lists to not need their normal summons effects. But the best decks that could take advantage of the Adventure Engine were ones that never used on-field effects of normal summons in the first place, so they didn't need to adapt their strategies to gain access to the powerful staple. And by far, the best decks that could use the Adventure Engine this year was Prank Kids. Prank Kids were already a decently strong deck going into 2022, as during 2021 they topped multiple events, but it did have a few issues. The deck was astonishingly consistent and could play a ton of hand traps and staples, but the deck itself also struggled against hand traps and didn't have a strong archetypal way to deal with spell and trap cards. But with the release of the Adventure Engine, Prank Kids basically got a free negate in Griffin Rider that they could use to stop an opponent's Ash Blossom and allow them to combo, or just allow the deck access to a free negate they could use to stop an opponent's board breaker like Triple Tactics Talents, and made the deck fairly dominant during the early parts of the year. But Prank Kids wasn't the only deck taking advantage of the Adventure Engine. A lot of decks that did use Adventure Engine this year used it in a similar capacity to Prank Kids in order to get a free negate to help with their main strategy. But one of the most interesting use of Adventure was in Rose Dragon's synchro strategies that centered around Crystron Halki Fibrax. This deck didn't use the Adventure Engine as a negate. Instead, the deck used the free bodies that the Adventure Engine provided to more easily access their synchro boss monsters alongside the Rose Dragon engine, because the bodies they provided happened to be extremely beneficial levels that helped make the deck work even after Rorodon was banned. Griffin Rider was level 7, so it could be used really easily with the level 3 Rose Dragon tuners in order to go into Baron de Fleur, swapping one negate for another while getting to use their effects of your Rose Dragons to summon Roxrose Dragon from the deck. Meanwhile, the actual Adventure token was level 4. This also synergized with the level 3 Rose Dragon tuners and would be used to dip into the pool of level 7 synchros to access cards like Shooter Riser Dragon, and more importantly, Yazi. And that Yazi could be popped with the effect of Baron de Fleur, so you could use its effect to summon out any worm monster from your deck. In the Scythe build, you can grab Mare for link summons, or in the Tenyi build, you can grab Moye or Taya. Essentially, the deck had an insane range of options by using the Adventure Engine, even though they weren't using it in the traditional way. Rite has been one of the best staples of the year, and has been used by a ton of strategies in a myriad of different ways for the insane amount of advantage it provides, to the point where even decks like Branded and Sprite, which actually care about their normal summon effects, were willing to build around using the engine. Digging its way to number 2 is Mystic Mine, a card which has terrorized formats since its release, and 2022 was no exception. Mystic Mine is a field spell with the effect that it's capable of floodgating your opponent out of the game entirely and winning the game on its own. While it's on the field, the player who controls the most amount of monsters cannot declare an attack, nor activate any monster effects. But it does come with its own built-in out, as if both players control the same number of monsters during the end phase, Mystic Mine will destroy itself. A resolved Mystic Mine can be game-winning by itself, so it's no surprise that it's made its way into the side and main decks of a ton of different strategies this year. And as a result, made deck builders change the way they built their decks so they had at least a single Auto-Mystic Mine in their main deck and didn't randomly lose one of their games in a match. Sprite had Smashers, Adventure decks had Dragoback, and Flunderees had Unexplored Winds. But not every deck was so lucky. The likes of Tri-Brigade, Branded, and Swordsoul all really struggled to deal with Mystic Mine with the tools that were available to them. This gave Mine several opportunities this year to see competitive play, and while it's seen a ton of play in decks this year, it was most infamously used by Sky Striker during May Hartford's YCS. Despite being only a rogue contender at best, Striker actually won the entire YCS, beating Swordsoul in the finals. But while Striker is a good strategy, a huge part of why it won was because of the deck's use of Mystic Mine. Since it played a lot of ways to find Mine and lock your opponent out of the game, by doing it on one cards like Demise of Land and Metaverse, Sky Striker could basically ensure that Mine was accessible to them at all times, which was really important because if Mine resolved, then Sky Striker had full control over the game. As they could either try to push through their opponent's board with the use of their spells and Ray, knowing that their opponent couldn't use their monster effects, or they could just sit behind it if they believed their opponent had no out. This, along with the other floodgates a Striker could easily play, led to its upset victory, but this of course wouldn't be the end of Mine's use this year, because it also just so happened to be amazing card when facing Tearlaments. You see, Tearlaments actually struggled to out Mystic Mine after it had already been resolved. The Ishizu cards made things a little bit easier, as you could just shuffle back a tier name to trigger your Pellerino's effect to pop their Mine, but if Pellerino wasn't on the field already, you were going to lose that game. And as a result, Tearlaments experimented with a number of interesting Mystic Mine outs that would have never seen play otherwise. Fusion Substitute could put back Kid Kalos to draw you a card to trigger your Pillarinos to pop Mine. Pot of Avarice could also trigger your field and let you draw 2 cards and can easily be used by Tearlaments so they fill up the graveyard so quickly. The deck even tried to run a small Sprite package just so they could natively run Sprite Smashers to deal with Mine. Mystic Mine was bound to be banned eventually, and it was in this year's December ban list. But the impact that Mine had on the game, both this year and as a whole, cannot be understated. When a single card changes deck building this much, it's always going to be format warping. But for as strong as Mystic Mine is, one staple this year had even more of a meta impact. And breaking their chains as the best staple of 2022 is Bystial Magnamhut, along with the Bystials as a whole, which can act as both hand traps and as an engine at the same time. Most of the Bystials all share a common effect, which makes them useful as hand traps. This common effect allows you to special summon from the hand by banishing a light or dark monster from either player's graveyard. This effect is normally just spell speed 1, but if your opponent controls a monster, it actually becomes a quick effect that you could use at any point during either player's turn. Every hand trap Bystial also comes with its own unique effect as well. So Roner lets you foolish a Bystial monster or a branded spell or trap card when it's sent to the graveyard. Bystial Druisworm lets you send a special summon monster your opponent controls to the graveyard whenever Druisworm is sent from the field to the graveyard. And last but certainly not least, Bystial Magnamhut triggers on its special summon and lets you search for any dragon monster except for Magnamhut itself that's in your deck or in your graveyard during the end phase of the turn. The majority of the Bystial archetype is actually just a series of DD Crows that specifically target light and dark monsters, and even just DD Crow itself has had an almost game-warping impact this year. Whether it's been used to banish your opponent's token collector, or their target for Branded in red, or even just to take your Sprite opponent's Ronin Totem out of the game, DD Crow and by extension graveyard interaction as a whole has been extremely important in 2022. Especially with Ishizu Tearlaments being the best deck of the format as they mainly play using their graveyard effects. But despite how strong Crow has been this year, it's actually currently seen very little play against Tearlaments. And it's not because Crow's effect has gotten any weaker, it's just that for the current format, the Bystials do what Crow does, but better. While DD Crow is solid against Ishizu Tearlaments, all DD Crow really does is interact with the opponent's graveyard, and even then, it makes you go -1 at card advantage to do so. The Bystials, however, do a lot more. They can interact with the graveyard like Crow and stop the graveyard effects of the Dark Tearlament monsters by banishing them before they can resolve. But in doing so, you also get to special summon out a free body to the field with an impressive 2500 attack stat that can be used to apply pressure to your opponent by threatening their board with the battle phase. In the case of Saronir, this is where its utility ends, unless you play a branded or Bystial-based strategy. But for Druisworm and Magnamhut, their bonus effects are insanely useful. Druisworm allows you to break boards by linking it away or even just crashing by battle and easily forces out interaction from your opponent. But by far the strongest of all the Bystials is Bystial Magnamhut. Magnamhut's effect is what allows for Bystials to more than just be a series of hand traps. Because while it's great for any strategy using any kind of dragons like Dragon Link, this effect can also be used to add any of your other Bystial monsters to your hand, ensuring you'll always have a way to interact with your opponent's graveyard. This has allowed for the Bystial monsters to see play as a stable engine of at least 3 Magnamhut and 1 Druid Swarm and a ton of strategies that are trying to counter Tearlaments right now. Tearlaments themselves have even been running a Bystial engine so they can counter other Tearlament pilots, especially since they can use Dark to steal an opponent's Magnamhut from the graveyard to get their Bystial engine online. In fact, the best rogue strategies of the format are decks that are capable of dodging or not caring about the effects of Bystials. Naturias and Madolche are earth monsters, so the Bystials can't interrupt their grave. Sprite can lock both players into level 2s before dark monsters hit the graveyard, and Flundereeze only ever puts Dimension Shifter in the graveyard. Overall, the Bystials are an extremely recent engine, but the way they've twisted the game around them is huge. These cards aren't just format warping, they're game warping. And even after Tearlaments leave the metagame, it's likely the Bystials are still going to see play in people's main or side decks for years to come, making them the best staples of 2022 by far. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other staples this year we may have missed, or you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.